Okay, so thanks everyone for coming along to my talk today. So I'll be talking about my current research proposal, which is titled Investigating Deccan-induced Environmental Changes and possibly also their impact on marine biota prior to the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction. This is a project I'm doing with my primary supervisor, Dick Kroon, who you all know in the department, and also my co-supervisor, Dr. James Barnett, who is a postdoc at the University of St Andrews. And this is a collaborative project between the University of Edinburgh School of Geosciences and also the University of St Andrews with the St Andrews Isotope STAG labs. Okay, so a bit about the background. So I want you to kind of picture yourself 66 million years ago. This is when we have this huge mass extinction event, the last of the great 5 mass extinction events, the Cretaceous-Paleogene, or KPG as I will refer to it from now on. And there's 2 pretty much main kind of accepted or disputed causes in relation to this event. The most widely accepted and widely implicated one is the Chicxulub impact, which I think a majority of the scientific community now accept is the main cause of the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction, which famously led to the demise of the non-avian dinosaurs. So this is almost like a kind of comparison here, but we have the Chicxulub impact, 10-kilometer wide asteroid, against this other thing that you might have not heard of before. It's not as well known or as publicized, but at the same time, 66 million years ago, we were having these huge volcanic eruptions in India, the Deccan traps, and I've got a scale there. Total size of these things were 1.5 million square kilometers. So to put that into perspective, that's about the size of present-day France. So these were huge emplacements of lava. So whereas the Chicxulub impact is widely implicated and its environmental impacts are more widely known, the exact environmental and biotic impacts of Deccan volcanism still remain poorly understood. So this is something I'd like to investigate as part of my topic. So to investigate this question, we're going to have to go to a very high-resolution sedimentary record, and one of the best records of this time up until the impact is this ocean drilling record from 1262. This is an ocean drilling program record from the South Atlantic in a place called Wallace Ridge, and pretty much through the analysis of plankton, or what we call benthic foraminifera, they were able to analyze pretty much the environmental changes leading up to the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction. So my co-supervisor James Barnett in 2017 proposed that there was actually a hypothermal abrupt global warming event that occurred just before the asteroid impact, and this is being speculated to be a direct cause of Deccan volcanism. So by going through the records, we can actually construct paleo-temperature records for the last million years of the Cretaceous, and what we can see is that there was an initial long, stable, cool period, which gradually led to a moderate warming of between 1 and 1.5 degrees. And then about at the chrome 30, chrome 29 boundary, we have this abrupt warming transition of +4 degrees into greenhouse conditions. And then we have a 4th phase, which we have a gradual cooling of about 4 degrees during the last 200,000 years of the Cretaceous, just up until the impact. So the current records for this event, this hypothermal, that's the blip there, phases 3 and 4. Current records include oxygen and carbon isotope data, iron intensity, and percentage calcium carbonate, and we'll revisit these in more detail shortly. However, there is currently to date no other acidification proxies. Acidification we'll touch on in the next few slides, but we believe with warming, increased CO2 content, CO2 being a weak acid, would acidify the oceans, and that should potentially show up in other types of proxy data We also, to date, have no other independent paleo temperature proxies. We just have the oxygen 18 for this event. So that is something that could also be applied here. Also, to date, we have no other equivalent planktic stable isotope data. All this data comes from the benthic or the seabed, so nothing from the surface waters. So the aim of my project is to quantify the changes in climate and carbonate chemistry related to ocean acidification which occurred during this latest Maastrichtian time. And the main motivations of this topic really are that through better understanding these abrupt climate change events, such as hypothermal events, directly relate to sustainable development goals, such as climate goal 13 on climate action, and also we're thinking about the impacts of warming and acidification on the life at the time in the oceans. So this is a quite intense graph here, but I'll briefly go through it with you. So this is my first objective, is to determine if ocean acidification occurred during the late Maastrichtian warming event. So as we can see, CO2 is erupting, is outgassing from the Deccan traps, and the CO2 is then enters the atmosphere, and then it is taken up mostly by the oceans. That's the world's largest carbon sink. And as CO2 dissolves into the oceans, it reacts with the seawater and forms carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid then breaks down and releases hydrogen proton, and this release of more and more hydrogen protons as more and more CO2 is dissolved in the ocean water relate to a drop in pH and then a drop in borate ions. Now, borate ions can then be related to a negative delta 11 boron and a decrease in the boron-calcium ratio in the shells of benthic foraminifera, like this one here that I'll be looking at. So this has led me to my first hypothesis, which suggests that high-resolution boron-calcium trace element and low-resolution delta 11 boron isotope proxies would show ocean acidification during the late Maastrichtian warming event. We also hear, as ocean chemistry is changing, the lysocline, which is the almost like a chemical gradient in the oceans for calcium carbonate, becomes shallower. So we would expect calcium carbonate to go down and iron intensity to go up. So the first method to go about this will be constructing new boron calcium trace element and stable isotope boron records. What you can see here is this is the established data from the site 1262. We have a carbon record, we have the iron records and calcium carbonate records. So the methods will be picking planktic forams over a 4-week period in Edinburgh, and then running these analyses in St Andrews using a coupled plasma mass spectrometer. If we compare the records, I've got some anticipated results here. Do note that these records at the bottom here, the green and blue ones, are predicted. So this is just what I think the shape of my graphs might look like. But I anticipate a strong positive correlation between boron and calcium records when compared to the calcium carbonate percentage records. And if that looks a bit complicated, just take your attention to the boron isotope record. You can actually see that when there's increases in boron isotope, we should see increases in calcium carbonate, and likewise decreases in calcium carbonate correlate to decreases in boron and boron calcium. Again, likewise with iron intensity, as iron intensity increases, we should see negative correlations with these two proxies. And again, with the carbon isotopes, it's a bit more difficult to explain for this talk, but I can talk about that in the questions. But really, we have a unusual negative 13 excursion here, so it's not entirely sure what we might expect with the results. Second objective will be to calculate the magnitude of the temperature change that occurred during the late Maastrichtian. Again, we've got the same diagram I've shown, but what's different here is that the CO2 is causing greenhouse warming. Warming of the atmosphere is being absorbed by the ocean, and that leads to changes in the ratio of magnesium and calcium with an increase of magnesium being taken up by the benthic forams, and a decrease in the oxygen 18 relative to the oxygen 16 isotope. So my second hypothesis would be that new magnesium calcium trace element proxies would also show this hypothermal event. Again, we have the established records of the litmus strychnine warming event with the oxygen isotopes. However, we do not have currently any paleo temperature equivalent to compare to this. So I will go on to endeavour to pick more forams to construct new magnesium calcium trace element proxy, again using the same technique as said prior. And this is what I anticipate. We anticipate that a positive correlation will be seen between the new magnesium calcium trace element data and the established 18O data from 1262. My last objective is to compare the current, compare new planctic stable isotope records from 1262 against the established benthic ones. Again, very complex graph, but what we're seeing here is CO2 enters the atmosphere, is absorbed by the oceans, so the ratio of 13 carbon to 12 carbon should be recorded in both the planctic and benthic foraminifera. Greenhouse warming is also induced by CO2 release. Again, CO2 release is then led into the oceans by heating, and that should be picked up on the oxygen isotope records of both planctic and benthic forams, leading to my third hypothesis, which would be that both the planctic stable isotope records and the benthic stable isotope records should both show the same warming event on both. This is a global warming event taking place in both the pelagic and benthic areas of the ocean. So yeah, my third method to using constructing new planctic stable isotope records. We have currently to the left there, as seen previously, the stable isotope benthic oxygen records and stable isotope carbon records from the benthos, but we do not yet have any planctic ones. So the methods to address this objective will be again more planctic picking done at here in Edinburgh, and then running stable isotope analyses for the planctics at the Wilson laboratory using the gas, I believe using a new other type of mass spectrometer at Edinburgh. And what do I anticipate for that? So again, we should see the same positive correlation between the planctic and benthic data. Probably not as pronounced because there's differences with planctics compared to benthics. Planctics are more prone to diagenesis and overprinting, but we should see the same sort of trends, positive correlation there between those two. And again, with the carbon isotope data from the planctics and the benthics, when my predicted or anticipated results for that is the same kind of, as you can see, trends, positive correlation. So just to quickly end there, just running over time there, but that's just to my conclusions, and I'm happy to take any questions.